If you're just getting into filmmaking, I think the better investment for you is actually Sony over Canon. And this is coming from a full-time filmmaker who uses Canon specifically. But knowing what I know now, I would make a completely different decision. And it really all boils down to these 5 reasons I'm going to cover in this video. And stick around till the end and I'll explain exactly why I won't be switching despite these reasons. But first, a disclaimer. I'm not telling you what you should or shouldn't buy. Honestly, I don't think gear matters as much as people say, but that's a topic for another video. But if you are a hardcore filmmaker who really obsesses over image quality and possibly the best bang for your buck when it comes to video right now, this video is for you. So with all that out of the way, let's get started. So the first reason I would choose Sony over Canon is better low light performance. Now this is no secret if you talk to anyone who shoots video that when it comes to Sony cameras, they just handle the shadows and those low light situations much better than Canon. In fact, right now I'm shooting on the Canon R6 Mark II, and in C-Log3, it actually gets pretty noisy in the shadows really quickly. But if I were shooting on a Sony camera, this really wouldn't be an issue. The only drawback with the Sony cameras is that you can't adjust the noise reduction. It's all done automatically for you. Whereas on the Canon, you can choose the amount of noise reduction you want baked into your image. And one of the reasons why the Sony cameras outperform the Canon cameras when it comes to low light is actually to the sensor megapixels and the base ISOs. So for example, the Sony a7S III actually comes with a 12 megapixel sensor, which is probably not really good when you're thinking photo terms, but when it comes to video, that's actually a 4K sensor. Without getting super technical, all this means when you have a lower megapixel is that you're able to get less noise in the image due to how large the photo sites are on the sensor. That's why when you go higher megapixels, you tend to get actually more noise in the shadowy parts of your image. And when we're talking about base ISOs, the cool thing about a lot of Sony cameras right now is that they'll actually come with 2 base ISOs. And if you don't know what a base ISO is, it simply is the ISO that is recommended for the sensor that allows for the cleanest image possible. So when you have 2 base ISOs, typically there's going to be one that's on the lower end, like say ISO 400, and then you might have one that's on the higher end, like ISO 3200 or 6400, and on some Sony cameras, it's actually 12,800, meaning you can pretty much shoot in pitch black darkness and get a relatively clean image out of those cameras. Canon has something somewhat similar, and it's not really like base ISOs. The trick I've noticed with Canon cameras is that whenever you double the ISO, that tends to be the cleanest signal on the sensor. So I only ever work in 100, 200, 400, and so on, just those doubles. The second reason I'd go for Sony is actually better dynamic range. For those of you unfamiliar, dynamic range is basically how well your camera can see in the shadows and in the highlights. So more dynamic range simply means that you can capture high contrast situations like a really bright sunny day indoors and actually capture the detail inside and outside. Having a high dynamic range for your videos really elevates the quality because you're not going to be losing a bunch of details in the shadows or the highlights. And my Canon R6 Mark II has roughly 12.5 stops of dynamic range, which is a lot and actually does look really nice, as you probably noticed right now. But a lot of the Sony cameras that are dedicated for video have upwards of 14 to 15 stops of dynamic range. And if you want to do the math, a stop is a doubling of how much data you can get. So from 12 to 15, that's 13 is double, 14 is 4, 15 is 6 times more data that you can see in the shadows and the highlights. And as a video snob, I can't get over dynamic range. I honestly wish I had more dynamic range, but I'm making do with the 12.5 that I have with my Canon camera. But if I were on Sony, I can get away with 14 to 15 on most of their new models. All right, on to the third reason why I'd go for Sony over Canon, better image stabilization. When Sony got into the mirrorless game way before Canon, they got ahead on a lot of their sensor technology and as well as their IBIS technology, in-body image stabilization. And in fact, they even have this external tool you can buy that actually reads the gyro data on the sensor that allows you to fix it in post and actually get pretty much gimbal-like smooth footage, even shooting on shaky handheld footage. And the biggest gripe I have with Canon when it comes to their IBIS is actually the IBIS wobble. And if you're unfamiliar with this, it's basically how the IBIS works on Canon. When you're going on a wider lens, I would say around 28 and below, you start to really notice it. But the corners of the image will actually start to wobble and shift and distort, almost like you're using warp stabilizer on Adobe Premiere. It's really distracting, and I really find it ugly, to be honest. Luckily, it's only in the corners, and it only really happens in wide focal lengths. Like I said, on anything under 28, it starts to become kind of problematic. So if you're someone who values having those wide angle lenses and doesn't want distortion, I would definitely go for Sony, because Canon right now has not fixed the issue. Even though they have installed some firmware updates that have improved it, hasn't removed it, and honestly, it's a shame. So I do have to go with much more stable options like a gimbal or a tripod, or just accept that the corners are gonna wobble if I shoot on Canon on those wide angle lenses. All right, on to the fourth reason. Sony actually has cheaper lens options. And this goes both for their first-party lenses and their third-party lenses. So by first-party, I just mean the Sony G Master lenses that Sony makes for their cameras. They tend to be like $1,000 cheaper than the Canon equivalent. For example, the Canon RF 24-70 f2.8, which is a fantastic all-around lens that most people really want, goes for $2,400. Whereas if I were to be on a Sony system and get that same Sony G Master 24-70 f2.8, I think it actually retails for under $1,800. I'll show the price on the screen so you can see it now. But you're essentially getting the same lens for a much lower price, and it's pretty much same quality. I haven't really noticed a difference when it comes to Sony and Canon lenses. They're both amazing products. And when we're talking about their third-party lenses like Sigma and Tamron, currently, as of the recording of this video, Canon doesn't allow third-party lenses except for a few Sigmas that they've sort of teased at, but they're all crop sensor lenses, which doesn't really appeal to me as a full-frame user. Whereas Sony has opened up their mount to any third-party lens. So Sigma and Tamron, who make amazing glass, I think Sigma's better than Tamron. They're much cheaper, they're more accessible to the beginner or to the prosumer who doesn't want to or can't afford those $1,000 to $2,000, $3,000 lenses that are for the first parties. So I find that if you were to go the Sony route, you need a lot less money to get pretty great image quality, especially when talking about the lenses. But that leads me to my fifth point. The fifth reason why I choose Sony over Canon is actually they're just cheaper cameras as well, especially when you boil it down to the specs that you're getting per dollar. So I just mentioned how some of these cameras have much better low light, much better dynamic range, sharper 4K, things like that. You would think that with all those specs that they must be really expensive cameras, and some of them are, but when you compare them to Canon cameras who don't have that same specs, they're actually either cheaper or just slightly more expensive. So for example, you can get an FX30, which is a crop sensor, I will give some credence there, but has amazing image quality, a much wider dynamic range than my Canon R6 Mark II. That camera goes for under $2,000. Whereas my Canon R6 Mark II doesn't have the same dynamic range, doesn't perform half as well in low light, costs actually $2,500. So combine that with the increased cost of lenses for Canon, Canon filmmaking gets pretty darn expensive really quick. You can probably get comparable and even better performance out of Sony cameras for much less money. And that's sort of the big reason why I think most filmmakers who really prioritize image and who want to actually make the most bang for their buck should go for Sony. But really quick, I'm going to share with you why I'm not switching, even though these are all very valid reasons for filmmakers to go for Sony. First off, no one really notices the difference between 12 to 15 stops of dynamic range unless you're a video nerd. So when I do show my footage to my clients, I don't think they really notice the difference between a Sony FX30 or an FX3 versus my Canon R6 Mark II just shooting C-Log 3. So at the end of the day, I'm still making the same amount of money I would be had I gone the Sony route. So it doesn't really affect me, so I'm not in a rush to switch. 2, the Canon RF lenses are amazing, and slowly but surely they've been increasing their lineup. And in fact, my favorite lens and the reason why I wanted a Canon mirrorless camera in the first place is the one you're seeing right now, which is the Canon RF 28-70 f2, which is something Sony just doesn't have, nor do their third-party partners. And in fact, the other lens that really excites me right now that Canon just released, which is a world first, is the 24-105 f2.8. So I think there's some value in the Canon ecosystem when it comes to their RF lenses that I do think makes it worth it, for me at least, to stay on Canon, and honestly, I don't have any reason to switch. Because at the end of the day, it's just about knowing your gear and knowing how to use it and make the most out of it. And at the end of the day, I'm in the ecosystem, I'm already bought in. I don't think it's worth the monetary switch off to Sony at this point. Like I said, it doesn't affect my business at all. This is more just for the filmmaker who really wants to get the most out of their filmmaking equipment. I really think the route for you would be to go with Sony. So what do you guys think? I know this might piss off some people, or some people might be confused by this. I'm just trying to help you guys make an informed decision, and I hope that this video was helpful in that way. And if you are Canon gang with me, I love you. Check out this tutorial on how to shoot in C-Log 3 for cinematic visuals. And if you're not, please enjoy the rest of your day. Check out my other filmmaking tutorials. I have plenty on my channel. Thank you so much for watching all the way until the end, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.